Hello, my name is Micheline Chi. I'm a Regents Professor at Arizona State University and also the Dorothy Bray Endowed Professor in Science and Teaching in the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College.
Well, in many senses, Mickey is really one of the progenitors of the kind of modern cognitive and learning sciences in terms of cognition, in terms of constructivism, and how people learn.
What drives me is the goal of figuring out how to help learners of all ages understand difficult concepts, especially in science and engineering. This goal translates into the research question of how can we support educators to be more effective in their teaching so that students can learn with deeper understanding. To answer this question, I assume that how teachers teach should be informed by how students learn. This assumption requires integrating knowledge from two distinct yet related disciplines, education and psychology. After doing several years of other research, I noticed that the instructional literature had been excited about the possible greater learning from active learning classrooms compared to what they call passive learning classrooms, because students seem to learn more from active learning classrooms. Active learning classrooms also close the ethnic, gender, and racial achievement gaps. Using the most current example, a published study in 2023, actually published in Science, showed that when calculus is taught in an active learning classroom, students had an 11% increase in the rate of passing. Increase in passing rate had held across racial and ethnic groups, genders, and majors. Unfortunately, no one knows what exactly is active learning, whereas passive learning is clearly defined as when instructors lecture and students are not physically active.
Most work on active learning has focused on how instructors teach in ways that are thought to promote active student engagement and peer learning. However, it's proven notoriously difficult to characterize active learning methods beyond the understanding that they should not be teacher-centered, as in a lecture, where students sit passively.
To address this lack of clarity for what active learning is, I developed a theory called ICAP.
At first glance, it's very simple. It distinguishes four kinds of learning activities that can be observed: the passive, active, constructive, and interactive type of activities. And what Mickey Chi does, and I think that's one of the very strong points in her work, that she grounds her theories and also this conceptual model in psychological theories. Passive is more about like storing, retrieving information. Active is more about applying information. Constructive is more inferring information, and constructive is about co-inferring. So these kinds of cognitive activities are more likely to occur at higher levels of the physical engagement in learning tasks.
ICAP identifies and defines three possible ways a student can participate in active learning classrooms. One way to manipulate instructional materials without adding any other information. This is called the active mode, at least I call the manipulative mode the active mode, such as underlining or highlighting text, measuring in test tubes, or testing in a laboratory experiment. The second way is to generate additional information beyond the instructional material, such as questioning a text, self-explaining text sentences, as I've shown before, drawing a diagram where one isn't presented. This is called the constructive mode. A third way is to collaborate with a peer in a co-generative way through dialogue, adding information beyond the instructional material and beyond the partner's contributions. This is called the interactive mode. Even though all three active learning ways of engaging exceeded the passive way, as shown on the slide, the most important finding to note, as shown in a study in our lab, is that there's a profound significant difference in learning outcomes with around 10% additional increment in learning scores from the active to the constructive to the interactive mode. This suggests that active learning classrooms should try to promote the constructive way of engaging, as it enhances 11% more learning beyond the active mode.
The power of ICAP is that it's based not on what the teacher does, but what the learners do, the extent to which learners engage with the knowledge and skills that you're teaching them during class. The four modes of ICAP are well defined, straightforward to apply in curriculum design, and easy to observe in an active classroom. In other words, I find ICAP to be very teacher-friendly. So I use ICAP to help design learning outcomes that directly inform the ways that I teach my students. The more you're able to move your teaching up the ICAP scale, the deeper the student engagement, and as Mickey's research shows, the better the learning.
The ICAP framework is grounded in the universal principles of cognitive engagement. Regardless of the medium or environment, the human brain responds to stimuli in predictable ways. So whether it's a physical classroom, a museum, an intelligent tutoring system, or a game on a mobile app, the ICAP framework taps into the inherent ways people process and interact with information regardless its modality. So I think that is why ICAP is so powerful and can be applied effectively across various learning contexts.
Mickey's framework, her ICAP framework, is applicable across the board in all aspects of anything. In a sense, because if you think about it, what makes humans humans? It's that we learn and we're able to pass on our learning. And so in that sense, every aspect, including whether online, physical, in games, in museums, humans are always learning.
We desperately need to upgrade learning experiences for students across education. For most students, and Mickey's research on several topics, self-explanation, on tutoring, on active learning, her insights are always very practical and easily applied. That makes it possible for them to get embedded in work across education and to change how we teach and learn across so many different subjects.
Or the ICAP framework is very beneficial for science and engineering education. It, first of all, provides a practical way to design new learning activities or modify existing learning activities. So the framework can be very helpful for K-12 teachers or college instructors. This classification has important implications for instructional design, especially in science and engineering contexts, where understanding and problem solving are crucial processes.
I can direct students to take verbatim notes and make sketches for class credit during a lecture, which is active. Or I can pause the lecture for them to apply concepts presented during class to solve problems, which is constructive. As a professor at a research-intensive university, I typically don't have time to make more than incremental changes to my curricula and teaching practices over time. But in using the ICAP framework, it's very rewarding to know that even relatively simple changes can greatly enhance student learning.
The active learning framework that Mickey developed is really easy to grasp. It makes intuitive sense to almost everyone. It applies in a wide range of situations, and it immediately changes how people think about learning experiences and designing learning experiences. So I find that if I have just a few minutes with someone who has no background in cognitive science or learning science, and yet they're working in classrooms or they're thinking about instruction and curriculum, products that are going to be used widely, and those were often the teams I'm working with, that I can introduce Mickey's framework to them in just a few minutes, and they will immediately have something that they can take and use. I think that is quite rare in learning science and in learning and in education in general.
One direction that I see in the future of education in 10 years is the proliferation of more online courses. I hope to be able to provide explicit guidelines for ways that make online learning more constructive and interactive.
ICAP is a universal model that applies to any learner group in any learning setting. The challenge is to disseminate the idea as widely as possible and in ways that are most useful to practicing teachers. I know that Mickey is very motivated to make the ICAP framework as accessible as possible to practicing STEM teachers at the K-12 and college levels.
My plans for the Yeadon Funds are to translate ICAP into pedagogical guidelines that can be delivered through professional development locally and globally, especially for STEM instructors in higher education.